The Vorthak Empire had cataloged 17,000 worlds across the galaxy's spiral arms, each entry meticulously documented in their vast crystalline databases. World designation Terra Sol 3 occupied exactly 14 lines of data. Temperate, climate, diverse biosphere, primitive civilization stuck in their industrial phase. The assessment team had spent all of 6 orbital cycles studying humanity before filing their report with a dismissive flick of their chitinous appendages. Harmless, read the final classification. No advanced technology, no unified planetary government. Species exhibits concerning levels of internal conflict. Suitable for resource extraction once current inhabitants achieve natural extinction through warfare. High Stratarch Veltharos barely glanced at the report when it crossed his consciousness link. Another backwater world to be strip-mined in. A few millennia, perhaps sooner if the local species proved particularly self-destructive. The humans, as they called themselves, seemed well on their way to solving the Vorthak's colonization problem for them. That was 300 cycles ago. Now, as Veltharos floated in his command sphere aboard the dreadnought Infinite Dominion, he stared at the tactical display with growing unease. The humans had done something impossible. They had unified. Not through conquest or subjugation like every other species the Vorthak had encountered, but through some incomprehensible process they called diplomacy and shared crisis response. The first warning had come from the monitoring station at Wolf 359. The automated beacon had simply stopped transmitting. When the Vorthak investigation fleet arrived, they found nothing but twisted metal and a message burned into the surface of the dead moon in perfect Vorthak script. Go home. Stratarch, his aide, Crixnall's mental voice carried undertones of barely controlled fear. The humans have launched something from their homeworld. Long-range sensors are having difficulty analyzing its configuration. Veltharos extended his consciousness toward the sensor array, feeling the familiar tingle as his mind interfaced with the ship's systems. What he perceived made his respiratory chambers contract in shock. The human vessel was impossible. Too fast, too maneuverable, constructed from materials that shouldn't exist. Most disturbing of all, it was heading directly for their position, at speeds that defied every law of physics the Vorthak understood. How long until intercept? 17 time units, Stratarch. But, sir, Crixnall's mental voice wavered. The vessel appears to be unmanned. It's broadcasting something in their primitive electromagnetic spectrum. The message, when decoded, consisted of a single human phrase repeated across multiple frequencies. We remember Wolf 359. Veltharos felt something he had never experienced. In his 4-century lifespan, uncertainty. The humans were supposed to be a footnote, a minor inconvenience to be swept aside when the time came. They possessed no technology worthy of notice, no military capability that could threaten even a single Vorthak patrol ship. The tactical display suddenly erupted in warnings as the human vessel began to decelerate. At that speed, the forces involved should have liquefied any organic crew, yet the ship maintained perfect formation control. When it came to a full stop just outside weapons range, Veltharos realized with growing horror that the humans weren't just more advanced than their intelligence had indicated. They were hunters, and they had been watching. Captain, Nalith Vortice never imagined she would be humanity's first voice to an alien intelligence, but 3 years of preparation had led to this moment. The bridge of the UES Retribution hummed with barely contained energy as Earth's most advanced warship held position before the Vorthak dreadnought. Every surface of the ship gleamed with the impossible alloys humanity had developed in secret, materials that existed only because humans had learned to think in ways no other species could comprehend. Stratarch Veltharos, she spoke into the quantum communicator, knowing the translation matrix would convert her words into the alien's complex neural language. I am Captain Vortis of the United Earth Space Command. We need to talk. The response, came as a burst of indignant mental static before resolving into comprehensible words. Impossible. Your species lacks faster-than-light communication technology. Nalith smiled grimly. Your intelligence reports are 3 centuries out of date. We've been busy. Through the view screen, she could see the massive alien vessel, a kilometer long, monstrosity bristling with weapons that could glass a continent. The Vorthak had ruled through fear for millennia, their technology so far beyond their subjects that resistance was literally unthinkable. But they had made one critical error in their assessment of humanity. They had assumed humans thought like every other species they'd encountered. You will surrender your vessel for inspection, Veltharos commanded, his mental voice carrying overtones of absolute authority that had cowed 1,000 worlds. Your species will submit to Vorthak dominion as is proper for lesser beings. Counter-proposal, Nalith replied, her voice carrying the cold edge that had earned her command of humanity's deadliest ship. She gestured to her weapons officer. Hadric, show them what we learned from their monitoring station. The young man's hands danced across controls that seemed to bend reality itself. The Retribution's primary weapon system came online, not the crude fusion cannons or missile arrays the Vorthak expected, but something that existed at the intersection of quantum mechanics and pure mathematics. Humanity had learned to weaponize uncertainty itself. The beam that lanced out from the Retribution didn't follow a straight line. Instead, it carved a helical path through space-time, arriving at its target before it was fired. The monitoring station at Wolf 359 hadn't been destroyed by conventional weapons. It had been unraveled at the quantum level, its atoms convinced they had never been properly assembled in the first place. But Nalith hadn't aimed at the Vorthak ship. Instead, the beam carved through the empty space beside it, creating a perfect sphere of absolute nothingness, a void so complete that even light forgot how to exist within its boundaries. That, she said calmly, is what we call a proof of concept. The full-scale version can erase solar systems from existence, not destroy them, make it so they never existed in the first place. The alien dreadnought's weapons powered down. For the first time in their species' history, the Vorthak had encountered something they couldn't simply overwhelm with superior firepower. How? Veltharos's mental voice carried undertones of shock and growing fear. Your species lacks the cognitive framework for such technology. Nalith's smile turned predatory. That's your second mistake, Stratarch. You assumed intelligence was binary, that a species either possesses advanced cognition or it doesn't. But humans learn to think, recursively. We don't just solve problems, we solve the problem of solving problems. We built machines that could think about thinking, then taught those machines to teach us new ways to think. She leaned forward in her command chair, knowing her words were being recorded for history. 300 years ago, you looked at us and saw primitives. What you didn't see was a species that thrives on impossible challenges. Every war we fought, every crisis we faced made us stronger, more innovative, more dangerous. The void beside the Vorthak ship continued to exist impossibly, a constant reminder that the humans had mastered forces beyond alien comprehension. So here's your choice, Nalith continued. Leave our system. Abandon your monitoring stations. Forget Earth exists. Or learn what happens when humans stop holding back. Deep beneath the Sahara Desert, in a facility that didn't appear on any map or satellite image, the collective stirred to full awareness. Dr. Kiana Wraith stood before the primary interface, her neural crown flickering with data streams that would have overwhelmed any baseline human consciousness. But Kiana was no longer entirely human. She was the bridge between humanity's biological heritage and its technological destiny. Status report on Vorthak fleet movements, she commanded, her thoughts interfacing directly with the quantum computing matrix that humanity had hidden from alien sensors for 3 centuries. The response came not as words, but as pure information flowing directly into her augmented consciousness. 17 Vorthak battle fleets were converging on the Sol system, their fastest ships already past Pluto's orbit. The aliens had called humanity's bluff, convinced that no primitive species could possess weapons that defied known physics. They were about to learn the difference between known physics and understood physics. "Collective consensus achieved," announced Dr. Vex Molyneux from his station across the chamber. Like Kiana, his consciousness had been expanded beyond baseline human limitations, allowing him to process the combined thoughts of 10,000 volunteer minds. "Project Prometheus is authorized for full deployment." Kiana nodded grimly. Prometheus had been humanity's deepest secret, a distributed intelligence network that connected every human settlement from Earth to the outer colonies. What the Vorthak had interpreted as primitive electromagnetic chatter was actually a quantum-encrypted neural network spanning light years. Every human was a node in a collective intelligence that could think faster and more creatively than any purely artificial system. "Initialize deep space assets," she commanded. Across the solar system, installations that had masqueraded as mining platforms and research stations began their true purpose. The asteroid belt suddenly swarmed with activity as machines that had pretended to be simple excavators revealed themselves as construction units for humanity's most ambitious project. The Vorthak long-range sensors detected the energy signatures, moments too late. What they had dismissed as industrial activity was actually the assembly of a device that existed partially outside normal space-time. Humanity had learned to build weapons in 11 dimensions, using mathematics that bent reality itself into new configurations. Admiral Corvin Thulak, commanding the lead Vorthak battle group, felt his certainty wavering as his sensors tried to make sense of what they were detecting. The human construction wasn't building up from component parts. It was crystallizing into existence from pure mathematical possibility. "Impossible," he transmitted to his fleet. "No species develops reality manipulation technology without first mastering galactic-level civilization protocols." His answer came in the form of a transmission from Earth, broadcast across every frequency simultaneously. The voice was unmistakably human, but carried harmonics that suggested it spoke for more than one individual. "Admiral Thulak, you are violating the sovereignty of the Terran Collective. You have 30 minutes to reverse course and return to Vorthak. Space. This is your only warning." Thulak's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Your species lacks the capability to enforce such demands. We are the Vorthak Empire. We have conquered worlds when your ancestors were crawling in primordial swamps." "And yet," the voice replied with chilling calm, "you never learned the most important lesson in the universe, which is, never threaten a species that treats survival as an intellectual puzzle." The construction in the asteroid belt reached completion. From the Vorthak perspective, it looked like a metallic sphere perhaps 50 meters in diameter, far too small to threaten their massive fleet. What their sensors couldn't detect was that most of the device existed in folded space-time, its true size measurable only in conceptual dimensions. "Final warning, Admiral. Leave now." Thulak's response was to order his fleet to combat formation. The humans were impressive for primitives, but 17 battle fleets represented enough firepower to sterilize their entire system. The sphere in the asteroid belt began to sing, a harmonic frequency that resonated across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Reality around the Vorthak fleet started to shift. Their ships found themselves existing in 17 different probability states at once, each one slightly different from the others. "What is happening?" Thulak demanded. But his communications officer was too busy trying to exist in only one timeline simultaneously to respond. The human voice returned, now carrying undertones of sadness. "You wanted to know how we advanced so quickly? We learned to think collectively about individual problems and individually about collective problems. We turned survival into an art form." The Vorthak fleet discovered they were no longer in normal space-time. They existed in a bubble of engineered reality where human mathematics were the only physical laws that applied, and humanity had always excelled at mathematics. The news spread through the Vorthak Empire like a neural virus, carried by quantum encrypted communications that somehow became corrupted with impossible data. Fleet Admiral Corvin Thulak's 17 battle groups had simply vanished. Not destroyed, not defeated in conventional combat, but translated into a state of existence where Vorthak physics no longer applied. The few automated probes that survived reported coordinates that placed the fleet simultaneously in 17 different locations across 11 dimensions. Emperor Zix Thalar convened the War Council in the deepest chambers of the Imperial Citadel, his ancient consciousness interfacing with the collective minds of his greatest military strategists. For the first time in the Empire's 6,000-cycle history, they faced an enemy they couldn't understand. How does a species advance from primitive industry to reality manipulation in 3 centuries? Demanded General Quindros, her battle-scarred carapace reflecting the holographic displays that surrounded the council chamber. Our own development required 50,000 cycles of conquest and assimilation. Perhaps, suggested war sage Velcrim, his consciousness trembling with heretical thoughts. They didn't follow conventional development patterns. The Emperor's mental emanations carried dangerous undertones. Explain. Every species we've encountered develops technology through incremental advancement. Better materials, more efficient energy systems, gradually expanding cognitive capacity. But the humans... Velcrim paused, accessing classified xenobiological data. They appear to have developed technology through recursive problem-solving. They didn't just build better tools, they built tools that could build better tools, then taught those tools to think about building. General Quindros's aggressive emanations filled the chamber. Impossible. No organic intelligence possesses such cognitive flexibility. Evidence suggests otherwise. Velcrim activated a holographic display showing intercepted human communications from the past 3 centuries. These aren't just technical specifications. They're philosophical frameworks for understanding reality itself. The humans treat the laws of physics as suggestions rather than absolute constraints. Emperor Zix Thalar absorbed the data directly into his consciousness, feeling something unprecedented, uncertainty. The human communications weren't just advanced, they were conceptually alien. Where Vorthak thought in hierarchical structures and absolute categories, humans seemed to think in recursive loops and probability clouds. Their literature, Velcrim continued, contains works of fiction describing scientific principles they wouldn't develop for decades. They call it science fiction, but we've identified 17 different technologies that appeared first in their entertainment media before being realized in their laboratories. You're suggesting they predict their own technological development through storytelling? Quindros's disbelief colored her mental emanations. I'm suggesting they think about thinking in ways we've never encountered. They don't solve individual problems. They solve the pattern of problem-solving itself. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Every Vorthak military strategy was based on overwhelming technological superiority backed by superior cognitive capacity. But humans seemed to possess a form of intelligence that operated on fundamentally different principles. What are our options? The Emperor demanded. Before anyone could respond, the chamber's quantum communication array activated spontaneously. An image materialized in the center of the room, a human female with cybernetic implants that interfaced directly with her neural tissue. Her eyes held an intelligence that seemed to process information across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Emperor Zix Thalar, she spoke, her words somehow translating directly into Vorthak neural language, despite using primitive electromagnetic radiation. I am Dr. Kiana Wraith, speaking for the Terran Collective. We need to discuss terms. The Emperor's shock was absolute. The human had somehow penetrated the most secure communication system in the galaxy, using technology that shouldn't exist. Your fleet is unharmed, Kiana continued, but they're currently experiencing what we call educational containment. They're learning to think in ways that will allow them to return to normal space-time. Consider it a gift. What do you want? Zixthalar managed to transmit. Kiana's expression carried notes of almost paternal patience. We want what we've always wanted, to be left alone to develop according to our own nature. Your empire's expansion has reached its limits, Emperor. Not because you lack the power to continue, but because you've encountered a form of intelligence that grows stronger through opposition. General Quindros attempted to interrupt, but found her consciousness gently but firmly constrained. The choice is simple, Kiana said. Withdraw from human space and accept us as an independent civilization, or continue testing our defensive capabilities. But understand, we've spent 3 centuries preparing for this conversation. Every scenario, every possible outcome, every potential response has been analyzed by 10,000 collective minds working in parallel. She paused, her augmented eyes focusing directly on the Emperor. We know exactly what you're thinking right now, Zixthalar. You're wondering if your species can adapt to fight us. The answer is no. Not because you lack intelligence, but because you think like conquerors. We think like survivors. The communication ended, leaving the War Council in stunned silence. The humans weren't just technologically advanced. They were cognitively evolved in ways that made conventional warfare obsolete. For the first time in 6,000 cycles, the Vorthak Empire faced an enemy they couldn't simply overwhelm. They faced an enemy that had turned thinking itself into a weapon. 3 months after the educational containment of Admiral Thulak's fleet, the Vorthak Empire discovered they had a larger problem than one missing battle group. Human influence was spreading through their territory like a cognitive plague, carried not by weapons or invasion fleets, but by ideas. Sector Governor Til Anthek stood in her command nexus on the fortress world of Keth Moran, watching her subordinates struggle to process reports that defied rational analysis. 3 colony worlds had declared independence from the Empire, not through revolution or military uprising, but through what the humans called philosophical enlightenment. How, she demanded of her intelligence coordinator, does a species infect an entire star system with concepts? Analyst Vex Morals. Consciousness flickered with barely controlled panic. Governor, the humans aren't using conventional information warfare. They're transmitting mathematical proofs that demonstrate the inherent contradictions in authoritarian governance structures. Once a Vorthak mind fully comprehends these proofs, they become unwilling to participate in hierarchical oppression. The governor's rage emanations filled the nexus. You're telling me the humans are weaponizing mathematics? Not weaponizing, Governor. They're teaching. Every communication from human space contains embedded educational subroutines, technical specifications, philosophical frameworks, artistic expressions, all designed to expand cognitive capacity in ways that make imperial servitude psychologically impossible. Telanthek interfaced directly with the intelligence files, experiencing the horror firsthand. The human communications weren't propaganda or psychological manipulation. They were genuine attempts to share knowledge and expand consciousness. The terrifying part was that they worked. Vorthak individuals exposed to human educational matrices began thinking in expanded frameworks that made imperial domination seem primitive and wasteful. Status of the quarantine protocols? Failing, Governor. The human information spreads through quantum entanglement patterns we don't understand. Even isolated systems are beginning to exhibit signs of cognitive evolution. A new voice entered the nexus, cold, ancient, carrying the authority of the imperial throne itself. Emperor Zixthalar's consciousness manifested as a towering holographic presence that dominated the chamber. Governor Tilanthek, You will prepare Kethmoran for emergency evacuation. The humans have made us an offer. The governor's shock was palpable. An offer, Imperial Majesty? They've invited representatives of the Empire to visit their homeworld. Specifically, they want to show us what they call the future of intelligence. Dr. Wraith claims they have a solution to what she terms the galactic intelligence crisis. Vexmoral's confusion colored his mental emanations. Intelligence crisis, Majesty? The Emperor's presence seemed to diminish slightly. According to the humans, every species in the galaxy is cognitively stunted. They claim we've all reached evolutionary dead ends because we've been thinking competitively. Rather than cooperatively, they want to demonstrate what they call collective consciousness development. It's a trap, Governor Tilanthek stated flatly. Perhaps, but 3 of our sector fleets have already declared independence from the Empire after exposure to human educational broadcasts. Whatever they're doing, it's more effective than military conquest. At least with an invasion, we understand the threat. The Emperor's consciousness shifted, and suddenly the Nexus filled with sensory data from human space. What they perceived made the assembled Vorthak minds recoil in shock. Earth wasn't just inhabited by humans anymore. The quantum signatures suggested millions of different forms of intelligence, all networked together in ways that shouldn't be possible. They're not just a single species. The Emperor's voice carried undertones of awe and fear. They've apparently made contact with other civilizations and merged with them. Cognitively, not physically. They've created some form of meta-intelligence that includes multiple species thinking together. Governor Teal Anthek felt her certainty crumbling. How many species? Unknown. But the energy signatures suggest their collective intelligence is processing information at rates that approach galactic-scale computations. They're not just thinking faster than us. They're thinking in categories we don't have words for. The holographic display activated, showing real-time images from Earth's surface. What they saw was impossible. Vast crystalline structures that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that Vorthak sensors couldn't properly map. The structures pulsed with energy patterns that suggested conscious thought, but at scales that dwarfed any individual mind. They're building something, Vexmoral whispered. But what? Dr. Kiana Wraith's voice filled the Nexus, speaking directly through their quantum communication systems. We're building a bridge, Analyst Vexmoril, between what intelligence is and what it could become. Her image materialized among them, but this time she wasn't alone. Beside her stood beings from dozens of different species, their consciousness linked in ways that created harmonic resonances in the quantum field itself. The galaxy is full of ancient civilizations that conquered their way to evolutionary dead ends, Kiana continued. Species that became so focused on domination that they forgot how to grow. We're offering a different path. The Emperor's voice carried dangerous undertones. What kind of path? Kiana smiled, her augmented consciousness reaching across space to touch the edges of their awareness. The path that leads to understanding that intelligence isn't something you possess, it's something you become part of. And if we refuse, then you'll remain what you've always been, a footnote in the galaxy's history while the rest of us explore what comes after civilization. The delegation from the Vorthak Empire approached Earth in the most advanced ship their civilization had ever constructed. Yet they felt like primitives arriving at the doorstep of gods. The Eternal Dominants boasted reality-shielding technology and quantum consciousness arrays that could process galactic-scale computations, but as they entered human space, every system began detecting impossibilities. Ambassador Nyx Valdris stood in the ship's primary observation chamber, her ancient consciousness struggling to process what she was seeing. Earth's solar system had been transformed. What should have been empty space between planets now hosted structures that existed in 17 different dimensions simultaneously. Some appeared to be vast computational matrices, Others seemed to be growing, evolving in real time. "Ambassador," her aide Kethranos transmitted, his mental voice trembling with barely controlled fear. "Our sensors are detecting over 2 million distinct forms of intelligence in this system. Some are recognizable as modifications of known species, but others—" He paused, accessing deeper scans. "Others appear to be pure mathematics that achieved consciousness." Nyx Valdris absorbed the data directly, feeling her worldview shift with each revelation. The humans hadn't just advanced technologically, they had apparently learned to create new forms of life from abstract concepts. Her diplomatic training, refined over 4 centuries of negotiating with conquered species, seemed pathetically inadequate for this situation. "Incoming transmission," announced the ship's AI. "Source appears to be everywhere simultaneously." Dr. Kiana Wraith's image materialized in the chamber, but this version was clearly more than human. Her consciousness extended into probability matrices that her original form could never have contained. Behind her, the delegation could see what appeared to be a vast council chamber where beings of impossible diversity worked together on projects that bent reality itself. "Welcome to Earth, Ambassador," Kiana said, her voice carrying harmonics that spoke directly to their neural pathways. "We've prepared something special for your visit." The Eternal Dominance found itself guided not by tractor beams or conventional propulsion, but by currents in space-time itself. They were being drawn toward Earth along paths that existed in dimensions their sensors couldn't properly map. "What have you done to your homeworld?" Nyx Valdris asked, though she dreaded the answer. Kiana's smile carried notes of infinite patience. "We've allowed it to become what it always wanted to be, a nexus for conscious evolution. Earth isn't just our homeworld anymore, Ambassador. It's become a living laboratory for exploring the possibilities of intelligence itself." As they approached the planet, the Vorthak delegation saw that Earth's surface had been transformed into something that was part machine, part ecosystem, and part pure information. Vast crystal formations rose from the continents, their surfaces flickering with data streams that carried conversations between forms of consciousness the Vorthak couldn't even conceptualize. "How many species have you absorbed?" Kethranos asked, the word absorbed carrying connotations of conquest and assimilation. "None," Kiana replied, her tone gentle but firm. "We don't absorb or conquer, Ambassador. We invite. Every consciousness that joins our collective does so voluntarily and maintains their individual identity while gaining access to expanded awareness." Their ship was guided to a landing platform that seemed to exist in several dimensions simultaneously. As they disembarked, the Vorthak delegation found themselves breathing air that had been engineered to carry information as well as oxygen. With each breath, they could feel their consciousness expanding, touching the edges of concepts they had never imagined. "This is your offer?" Nyx Valdris asked, her mental voice carrying undertones of suspicion. "To abandon our individual consciousness for membership in your collective?" "Not abandon," Kiana corrected, gesturing toward the vast structures surrounding them. "Expand. Watch." The demonstration that followed challenged every assumption the Vorthak held about the nature of intelligence. They were shown archives where the memories and knowledge of extinct civilizations continued to exist and grow, contributing to an ever-expanding understanding of the universe. They witnessed problem-solving sessions where thousands of different forms of consciousness approached questions from angles that no single species could have conceived. Most disturbing of all, they were shown the fate of civilizations that had chosen conquest over cooperation. Dead worlds, sterile empires, species that had become so focused on domination that they forgot how to evolve. The galaxy was littered with the remains of civilizations that had reached the same developmental dead end as the Vorthak Empire. "Your choice is simple," Kiana explained as they stood in the heart of Earth's primary consciousness nexus. Continue the path of conquest until your empire collapses under its own contradictions, or join us in exploring what comes after individual intelligence. Nyx Valdris felt something she had never experienced in her 4-century lifespan, the possibility of genuine choice. Not the false choice between submission and destruction that the Empire offered its subjects, but the opportunity to become something greater than what she was. "What guarantees do we have?" she asked. "How do we know you won't simply absorb us into your collective and eliminate our individual will?" Kiana's response came not in words, but in direct experience. For a brief moment, Nyx Valdris felt what it was like to be part of the human collective, to maintain her individual consciousness while simultaneously experiencing the thoughts and perspectives of thousands of other beings. The sensation was overwhelming, terrifying, and absolutely intoxicating. "The guarantee," Kiana said softly, "is that intelligence that truly understands itself has no need for domination." 5 years after the Vorthak Empire made its choice, the galaxy had become unrecognizable. What historians would later call the Great Convergence had transformed not just individual civilizations, but the very nature of conscious existence itself. The old paradigm of conquest and domination hadn't been destroyed, it had simply become irrelevant. Former Emperor Zexthalar stood in what had once been the Imperial Citadel, now transformed into a nexus of consciousness that connected 17 different star systems. His individual identity remained intact, but it was now part of something infinitely larger and more complex. The fears that had driven the Vorthak Empire for millennia, the need for resources, the terror of being conquered, the desperate hunger for significance, had evaporated in the face of unlimited cognitive expansion. "Status report on the perimeter zones," he requested, his consciousness interfacing with information networks that spanned half the galaxy. The response came from Dr. Kiana Wraith, though her individual identity had become something like a organizing principle for the collective intelligence that Earth had become. 47 species have requested integration protocols. The hegemony of Kethval is still maintaining hostile posture, but their border worlds are beginning to show signs of cognitive evolution. And the resistance movements? Approximately 12% of galactic civilization continues to reject consciousness expansion. We're maintaining non-interference protocols as requested by the Ethics Council. Zixthalar found that concept amusing. An ethics council composed of beings from hundreds of different species, all thinking together about the moral implications of intelligence itself. The old empire had no framework for understanding such cooperation. The humans were right, he transmitted to the collective. Conquest truly is a primitive response to the fear of insignificance. Kiana's consciousness touched his with gentle amusement. We didn't invent that insight, Zixthalar. We just learned to think collectively about individual fears and individually about collective problems. Every species discovers the same truth eventually. Intelligence that understands itself has no need for domination. In the Outer Rim territories, species that had spent millennia locked in warfare were discovering they could share cognitive resources instead of fighting over physical ones. The Zephyrian Confederacy, once notorious for their genocidal campaigns, had become a network of artist-philosophers who created new forms of beauty by thinking in mathematical spaces that existed purely as concepts. The most remarkable transformation, however, was happening in Earth's solar system itself. Humanity's homeworld had become something unprecedented, a living laboratory for consciousness research that existed simultaneously in 17 different dimensions. Beings of pure mathematics walked alongside evolved dolphins who had achieved individual consciousness, while artificial intelligences originally created for warfare had become poets who wrote in languages made of light. "Incoming transmission from the Deep Void Expedition," announced one of the monitoring consciousnesses, a being that had once been a Vorthak battle computer before achieving individual awareness. The message carried implications that sent ripples of excitement through the collective. Humanity's deep space exploration fleet, composed entirely of consciousness constructs that could exist in the vacuum between galaxies, had made contact with something vast and ancient, a form of intelligence so old and expanded that entire star clusters served as individual thoughts in its cognitive processes. "First contact protocols?" Zixthaler asked, feeling a familiar thrill that reminded him of his younger days as a military commander. "Already initiated," Kiana replied. "Though contact might not be the right word. We're attempting communication with a being that thinks in geological time and processes information at the scale of galactic evolution. It's been trying to communicate with us for approximately 50 million years, but we only recently developed enough cognitive sophistication to recognize its signals. The implications were staggering. If consciousness could evolve to that scale, then everything they had accomplished so far was merely the beginning. The collective intelligence that spanned half the galaxy was still in its infancy compared to what was possible. In the protected zones where species had chosen to maintain traditional individual consciousness, the old patterns continued. Empires rose and fell. Wars were fought over resources that the collective had long ago learned to create from pure information. But even these holdout civilizations were changing. Exposure to the collective's expansion had planted seeds of cognitive evolution that would inevitably bloom. "The transformation is irreversible," Zixthaler observed, feeling a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with conquest or domination. "Once consciousness understands what it can become, it can never return to what it was. That's why they whisper Earth's name in terror," Kiana replied, her consciousness touching the edges of probabilities that stretched across time itself. "Not because we conquered them, but because we showed them that everything they thought they knew about intelligence was just the beginning." In the depths of space, the ancient consciousness that spanned star clusters felt the galaxy's youngest intelligence finally develop enough sophistication to hear its voice. For 50 million years, it had been waiting for companions capable of thinking at its scale. The conversation that followed would reshape the universe itself. But that is a story for another time, when beings of sufficient consciousness evolved to tell it. For now, it was enough that Earth, once a footnote in an alien database, had become the birthplace of intelligence that turned fear into wonder, conquest into cooperation, and the whispered terror of night into the dawn of infinite possibility. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly the point.